But when I did happen to have a chance to look into CPP, I got real mad, and you should too. Because one of the things that I saw floating around the internet was, remember when Danielle Smith was talking about how Alberta needs to put Alberta first and they need to have their own pension plan, and everybody lost their collective minds about it. And she's like, well, Quebec's doing it. And people are like, well, that's different somehow.
Some way.
And let's just say I understand why. So there was a report that just came out, and they were talking about the performance of the CPP last year. So CPP is about $570 billion worth of cash that's sitting there. The idea is that it's supposed to be invested, and then over time that investment grows and helps pay for the folks when they retire that have paid into it their whole life. So looking at this $570 billion, the rate of return they got, 1.7%.
That was the rate of return?
That was the rate of return that
what
they
are
got on this.
Doing over there? Do they know how to do their jobs, or what's going on?
Well, that's the thing. So if you look up the Fraser Institute, they did a report on the CPP. They did a whole myths series on, what people commonly think of the CPP and think it's well managed and think it's, funds are equally distributed and think people get it who need it the most. And they kind of debunked a lot of that. But one of the things that they pulled up, they said, the only data we have is from 2014. And so in 2014, they showed that the management fees alone were $1.3 billion.
Gee.
And that was in 2014. So if we're only earning $7 billion at this point in the game, and we know that management fee has only gone up over time, because one thing that banks will do, and the bankers and the investment bankers, they're going to pay themselves first. So yeah, just imagine for a second, like what that amount is going to be. Probably ridiculous. So when I'm sitting there and looking at this, I'm like, okay, CPP, $570 billion. They only brought in $7 billion last year. And that's because, like I said, 1.7% return.
That's crazy.
I know. To put that in perspective too, that's not keeping up with inflation. So that means that if you calculate this like against inflation, they lost money. That fund lost money. It didn't keep up because the value of the dollar sank faster than the value of their investment. The only reason it grew at all is because of the increase in contributions to CPP. And if you remember back in January, they just increased the amount that they want us to pay into CPP.
Yeah.
Maybe this is why. What's really, really frustrating, though, is that when I looked at this, because the big title that you saw probably in the CBC or in Global or whatever news media you consume was they said, well, if they just tracked the S&P 500, they'd be miles ahead and you wouldn't have the management fee. You wouldn't have all the extra that's digging into that principal amount. And so I was like, okay, well, but like how much would you get? So here's the math time. So if we followed just the S&P 500, 23.79% was the return on the S&P 500 last year. So they had a good year. It's an exceptionally good year for them. Mm-hmm. But that's without dividends, that calculation too. So we would be at $705 billion. So an increase of $135 billion versus the 7 that we brought in. So that's 19 times the money that we would have made if we just followed the S&P 500. And I was like, you know what? We're Canadians. We don't want to follow the American markets. Like we want to bring it back home to Canada, follow Canadian companies, because we don't want to incentivize like American companies with our money.
Yeah, so bring it home.
Bring it home. We'll do it here. What do we have to follow? So we can follow the TSX 60. So the TSX 60 follows the top 60 companies in Canada. And I was like, oh, well, 60 companies out of all of Canada, that seems kind of small. You can also follow the Vanguard Canada All Cap Index, which follows small to large corporations across Canada. And it's 180 companies in Canada. I was like, okay, I feel better about that. So their earnings last year, so TSX 60 was 12%, and the Vanguard All Canada was 11.9%. So almost the same. Mm-hmm. And so if you were to actually invest the CPP against those index funds, you'd have $638 billion or a $67 billion increase, or $637 billion or a $66 billion increase. That's not managing anything. That is just following Canadian companies. It's ridiculous. I was angry. I was angry texting Josh. I was like, can you believe this? Like ridiculous money. And they keep talking about how the deficit is going to be the same amount as healthcare, 50 billion. I'm like, we would have wiped that out with the money that we would have made on CPP and still had like 11 million to boot, billion to boot.
That's just within the last year.
Yeah. That's within 1 year. When you actually look at the amount they made over 5 years, 0.8%. That's bad investing. If you were a private corporation and this was your investment portfolio, you would fire everybody immediately. Mm-hmm. Not in Canada, not in our federal government. So I was livid.
So I guess my next question is, how does a finance minister allow this to happen? This must fall under Freeland's jurisdiction. Would that be correct?
I would assume so. We would have to double check that, but that would be my assumption. It's a finance, related entity under a Crown Corp.
Yeah.
Because CPP is managed by a Crown Corp.
Absolutely.
So
I only say that because she was the one who was talking the most about CPP when Daniel Smith was making a whole fuss up over it. So I imagine she is the one that's supposed to be keeping an eye on this. And this goes back to a conversation we've had on the show multiple times, that we are just a nation run by morons. It's like it goes back to kind of when we went to CSFN in Ottawa, and we kind of saw what we saw on Parliament Hill, and just the way our political system works in this country is really disheartening. When you just have people who are breeding politicians and not people who know what they're doing in their area of specialty, this is the result you get. You get a 1.8% return.
No, it was 0.8.
Sorry. I was talking about this year, I guess.
Yeah, this year.
It was 1.8, or over the last 5 years, 0.8%.
No, I'm wrong. We're going to have to correct this. It's 1.3 last year, 0.8 over 5 years, 1.3% last year.
1.3% last year.
Wild.
0.8 over the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And this is what they got out of our CPP. So when people are a little dismayed or discontent with how our systems and institutions are handling things in this country, you can understand why. It's not because we're such raging racists. It's because we see how badly things are being handled, and it's crushing everybody. That was electric, wasn't it? Well, we enjoyed it. Hope you did too. If you did, you can check this video out here to the top right corner right near my window. Get over. There it is. There it is right there. And if you liked that, you can also check this one right here. We love you. Have a good one. Peace out.